Okay, so this is the movie that everyone's been ranting and raving about. Basically, to sum it all up, is this another slave movie? Yes, but they try to put a twist on it. They tried. If you've seen the movie The Village by M. Night Shyamalan, then you'll know exactly what I'm talking about at the end with the huge twist. Same premise here. What is? Let's just get into it, shall we? Janelle Monae has pretty much resigned to the fact that she's going to be our generation Cicely Tyson. Cicely Tyson basically was the old school go-to resident for or actress for slave movies. So clearly, Janelle Monae has decided to pick up her reins and take the baton and run along with it. Okay, so now we open up with a quote from William Faulkner. It says, "The past is never dead. It's not even past." So now we go to the plantation that's currently owned by the Ninth Infantry Confederate Army. Confederate soldiers are everywhere. Eden is taken away via horseback. There's an African-looking slave. She tries to escape and is captured via a noose. She begs to be killed. She is then shot dead. Her body is then dragged back to the plantation and burned in the crematorium. This takes place all in front of her husband. It was a failed escape attempt. Okay, Eden is then taken to the general and then beaten for speaking without permission and for leading a failed escape. She's beaten again for not saying her new name. She is then branded. She finally speaks her new name, which is Eden, which is reminiscent to the Toby scene in Roots. Ugh. 6 weeks later, new slaves are brought in, particularly their new one named Julia. Eden is seen putting grease on the door hinges, possible for a future escape. Eden is then told by the slave Eli, which was the husband of the dead female slave killed earlier, that they need to try again. The slaves are referred to as inferiors. The slaves are not allowed to speak to one another unless given permission by white folk. They pick cotton just to burn it. Eden practices walking on quiet floorboards. So in the cabin, there's squeaky floorboards and then there's quiet floorboards. And she kind of does these long strides and she counts to walk on the quiet ones, okay? Eden is from North Carolina. Julia is from Virginia. Julia then asks what's her plan. Eden says to keep their heads down and mouths shut. Julia reveals she's pregnant. Julia doesn't want to follow the quiet rule and questions Eden's leadership. The general then returns back from war. They chant blood and soil. Blood and soil is a nationalist slogan from Nazi Germany of a racially defined national body, which is the blood, and united with a settlement area, which is the soil. The general then praises a recent victory over the Northerners. He speaks on inheritance and blood rights. He refers to the female slaves as sapphires. Julia is chosen by a young soldier named Daniel. Julia is then beaten by Daniel for speaking to him without permission when he entered the room. Eden can hear from the next cabin over. He accidentally kicks her in the stomach. The next day out in the field, Julia has a miscarriage. Eli tries to run interference and is taunted over his dead wife by Captain Jasper. Eli is punished by cleaning the shed, the crematorium. While cleaning the crematorium, Eli finds his dead wife's gold cross. The general, later on that night, rapes Eden. Then, she then wakes up to a phone call in the morning. She has a flight to catch. The scene literally switches. So while she's in the bed, the general is asleep. She wakes up to a phone call. She has a husband and a daughter. She gets out of bed, grabbing her lower back. There's no brand scar. The same area where she was branded earlier. She grabs her back, but there's no branding scar. She is a sociologist with a PhD. Veronica Skypes Elizabeth about intersectionality of race, class, and gender. Veronica leaves for her flight. Dawn, played by Gabby Sidibe, visits Veronica. Veronica gets flowers that says, "Look forward to your homecoming." She then meets Sarah at the convention, who's another panelist. Sarah's a white woman. Sarah has a panel on the exorcism of the unconscious past. Veronica then responds with the William Faulkner quote from the very beginning of the movie. And then she goes on to say that the ancestors haunt our dreams to see themselves forward. Elizabeth then sneaks into Veronica's suite and steals her lipstick and is wearing a pin on her coat with the same insignia of BD, which stands for Blake Denton, that was branded onto Eden's lower back earlier in the movie. She leaves a strand of hair on the pillow and then she leaves. Veronica talks about survival mode for black people. She's on the panel. She's a guest speaker promoting her book. She then calls patriarchy arrogant and says that is the woman's opportunity. She then quotes Asada Shakur. So there's some black feminism here in this movie. You wouldn't be. Are you surprised? I mean, pretty much it's Janelle Monáe. The cover of her book features a Rorschach butterfly. On the elevator back to her suite, Veronica meets a little white girl wearing a Victorian dress, and the little girl tells her to be quiet or you'll get in trouble for talking. Sarah, Dawn, and then Veronica hit the town. Veronica's hubby tells her he didn't send her the flowers. The trios then try to be seated by the kitchen by the hostess. Dawn kind of snaps and says, we'll take another table over here. Okay? Dawn is the loose one of the group. A patron sends them over a drink. Veronica then mentions her lipstick is missing. Veronica then takes a separate Uber from Dawn and Sarah. Dawn is hitting on her Uber driver. Veronica gets a call from Autumn, her real Uber driver. Elizabeth is driving the truck as Veronica is knocked unconscious by Captain Jasper because he was sitting in the third row seat. This is a Suburban. Okay. Eden then wakes back up in the cabin as the general gets a cell phone call at 3 a.m. Now, mind you, this is supposed to be a slave plantation set in like the late 1800s, but somehow the cell phone's ringing. Here's the twist. This is why I refer to The Village by M. Night Shyamalan. At the very end, you'll see, and we'll continue as more clues are dropped as to why the twist is coming. Okay, the general then tells, he mentions darkies and an unwanted exposure. Eden is then eavesdropping on the conversation. The general then tells her they will never take her away from him. The next day, she places more grease on the door hinges and practices walking on the quiet floorboards again. The next day on the plantation, Julia is missing. Eden is sent looking for her. She finds her body hanging from the raptors in the cabin. She hung herself. There's a butterfly tattoo on Julia's left ankle. We know what the butterfly means. Okay. And then the sound of an airplane can be heard overhead over the plantation. They can hear it, but they can't see it. Eden then tells Eli they escape tonight. Eli then begins whistling the song, the Negro spiritual, Lift Every Voice. Now that song wasn't, the lyrics wasn't drafted until 1900. And then the the composer was James Weldon Johnson, whose brother then put music to it in 1905. So that the timeline ain't adding up. So they're doing things in the now and the present, which you wouldn't have done in the past like that. Okay. Eden then covers her face with Murray's pomade. Here's another clue. Murray's pomade wasn't created until 1926. Okay, so there's no plantations in 1926. So you see the twist coming. The next night, Eden does a front flip out of the bed and begins walking out on the quiet floorboards. She opens the door, she meets Eli, and finds the general's cell phone. They drop it, and two soldiers find it. They mention there's no cell phone rule here. Eli then kills Daniel with a hatchet. He tells Eden they have to find out about this place, even if he doesn't make it. They take the cell phone and call 911, but the operator can't hear them due to the lack of a signal. Eden then says they need to unlock the general's phone via facial recognition, so they can send out a location. So they sneak back into the cabin, but the general ambushes them. Eli's then stabbed, and then he's chopped in the chest with a hatchet. Eden then stabs the general in the side with a sword and tells him her name is Veronica. She uses the facial unlock on the phone to call her husband. She tells him to call the cops, but loses the signal. She then sends out her location. Eli, before he was kidnapped, was a professor. Eden then takes down the Confederate flag and wraps the general's body in it and then drags it to the crematorium. He's still alive. He tells her this doesn't end here. Captain Jasper catches her off guard. She tells him the general is hurt. She leads him to the crematorium. She locks him inside. He refers to him as Senator Denton. So Senator Blake Denton, BD the brand, BD, he's a senator. Okay? Veronica locks them inside and then lights the crematorium, setting them both on fire. Then there's the image of her walking away from the crematorium while it's on fire and her holding a stick on fire. Okay. She's then chased on horseback. Elizabeth is giving chase while firing at Veronica. Elizabeth reveals to Eden Veronica she was her father's favorite and that she was the only one not chosen by Elizabeth. Eden then knocks her off the horse and begins to get the best of her before riding off again, with Elizabeth tied to a rope being dragged, and then her neck is broken by hitting a stone monument of Robert E. Lee while being dragged by the horse ridden by Veronica. As she rides into the middle of a Civil War reenactment. There's signs that says no cell phone signals. It's called the Antebellum Civil War Reenactment Park. She rides into the parking lot as the cops show up, and an airplane is seen flying above. The twist is here. The FBI then raids the plantation and frees the hostages. The park is then torn down. I will say this, at the very end when she's riding the horse, she got the long braids, she got the tomahawk. She's very reminiscent of early indigenous Americans. It looked good. It was a good looking shot of her riding with the tomahawk in her hair. Okay, so that was a very powerful image, but it's just another slave movie, y'all. They tried to twist it. They tried a good job of twisting it. It just didn't work for me. It was ambitious, but at the end of the day, it's another slave movie. So now you got to put more trauma into people, thinking they're going to get, out here getting kidnapped and placed in Civil War reenactment parks to be slaves, modern day slaves. This movie was a mess. But that's my movie reviews. Y'all have a good one. Peace.